I can quickly, while people are joining, I see folks have joined already. So just a quick shout out, there is a new GitOps work group that has started in the community. That's not a group where we go and write code or discuss code. That's more of a work group to discuss best practices across tools. That starts exactly 1 hour before this one. So folks are pretty much joining over from that meeting. To those who went there, um, I'll ensure everyone, at least in Red Hat, has an invite to that, and the other folks as well. And to to kind of move from there to what we would be discussing today is that so we've been discussing for a while about application sets. And I think it's a good time for us to start considering moving application sets into Argo CD and decide and try to see what that first class delivery or release of application sets with Argo CD would look like. Um, we may come up with a time frame later on. I think Alex and Jesse, we need to also figure out that if we want to talk about our Argo CD graduating, whether it's a good time to add it now or later. But I think that's a different conversation. So yeah, I think we'll talk about application sets. Jonathan, it would be awesome if you could give a 5-minute introduction of application sets in general, kind of the same one which you gave to folks internally as well. Do you have those slides around?
I do.
Awesome. So if we could do that, so which means in the context of Argo CD, if we could introduce application sets as a project, what it does from a user perspective, and then we could go ahead and talk about what would it mean to bring application sets into Argo CD, both from a UI perspective, from a release delivery perspective, from code testing perspective, everything else. We can have the discussion on that.
Yep, sounds good. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep, and a quick thing before we start, just as a usual tradition, if there are newer folks, we do an introduction. We have Serena on the call from Red Hat. Serena, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the team?
Hey, sure. Hi, my name is Serena Nichols. I've been at Red Hat for, I don't know, about 6 years, and I have had, my background is actually in development, UX and product management. So I'm joining these calls to kind of look at this more of a from the user experience side, I think, as well as the fact of how things end up fitting into OpenShift just in my own mind going forward. So, but I'd love to be able to help with any UX related comments, questions, etc. if there's any need.
Awesome. Thank you for the offer and welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Jonathan, you could take the floor with the introduction and everything else after that.
Awesome. And are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So let's jump to here. So yeah, I thought I'd start out by giving a brief introduction to application sets for those that are unfamiliar. Application sets is currently an independent project from Argo CD. It exists in the Argo Proj Labs application set repo. So Argo Proj Labs is kind of the incubator organization for Argo targeted projects. An application set is one of those projects. It's been worked on by a few folks in the community. And essentially it's a custom controller that allows you to target Argo CD applications. So I'll go into that in a second, but everything that I'm about to talk about, you can find in the really nice proposal that they put up in the Argo CD application set repo. So if you're looking for more detail than the brief introduction that I go through here, definitely check out this proposal in the application set repo, which goes into some of the scenarios that we're looking to support, some of the design decisions, desired features, and so on. So let's start out by looking at an Argo CD application. This is the standard Argo CD CR that we're all familiar with. It allows you to map a Git repository. So in this case, the standard Argo CD example repo, targeting a specific revision. So just head, targeting a specific path in that repository, guest book in this case, just using the standard Argo CD example guest book. And well, this is GitOps. So our goal is to take Kubernetes resources from Git and map it to Kubernetes. Where are we going to map it? We're going to map it to the destination that's specified in the Argo CD application definition. So it's going to my local Kubernetes cluster in the guestbook namespace. But one thing to note is that there's really only a single destination here specified and a single source specified. So you can't say, I want to take this source repository and map it to a bunch of different clusters using the standard Argo CD application. Likewise, you cannot say, I want to take a bunch of different paths in this repository or a bunch of different repositories and map them to a single Kubernetes cluster, the kind of mono repo scenario. So that design constraint of the Argo CD application is kind of what application set has been designed to help solve. The proposal that I talked about actually addresses a couple of use cases that are great fit for application sets. One is the so-called cluster add-on scenario, where a operator, a cluster infrastructure manager wants to deploy, say, something like Argo workflows or Prometheus operator, the Kubernetes resources for that, customized Helm, etc., defined within a single Git repository, but they want to target a bunch of different clusters all at once. So let's say as an organization, they're managing, say, 50 clusters, 100 clusters. They don't want to have to go in and create and maintain a bunch of different Argo CD application CRs in a Git repository using something like the app of apps pattern. What they want is a single resource that they can manage that will handle both what is defined. So in this case, a couple of apps, workflows in Prometheus, and then all the destination clusters that they want to deploy to. So that's the cluster add-on scenario where you're targeting, where it's kind of like a one-to-many between a bunch of different clusters. The other that the application set proposal goes into is improving mono repos. So having a single Kubernetes cluster that is managed entirely by a single Git repository. As the proposal notes, that's the primary mode of operation of Flux CD. And this would, an application set would make this scenario significantly easier. So I'll jump to the actual solution as proposed. This is probably, there's a few different generators, which are ways to configure what is actually being targeted at the Kubernetes repo. But I'll start with the simplest one here. This is the list generator. Let me do this. So just like with the Argo CD application CR, we want to define what it is ultimately that we're deploying to the cluster. And you'll recognize the source and destination fields as being very similar to what I already showed you with the Argo CD application CR. So we've got a repo, what are we deploying? We're deploying stuff from this Git repository, this branch or tag. Under that Git repository, what specific path? Well, that's the guest book. And what destination? Well, here we start to see that it looks a little different than the Argo CD example I showed you before, because now there's this parameterized URL value here. And then there's a couple others here and here. So the Argo CD application CR does not have parameterized values. This is new to, or at least in this form, this is new to application sets. And what this parameterized value means is go through what is in the generator, take the values that are generated by the generator, and insert those values into the templates that are defined in the template section of the application set CR. So in this case, as part of destination, we're targeting a server. So that would be a Kubernetes server. And it's parameterized, so we need to fill in a value from that. So what application set is going to do is pull up the CR. It's going to go through each of the items that are defined here, and one by one turn these into an array of values or parameters that are going to be substituted into the template. So as you can guess, we're targeting 3 different clusters, made up IP addresses, obviously, unless you haven't dialed them. Engineering dev, engineering prod, finance prod. The application set controller is then going to create an Argo CD application, one for each of these sets of values in this form for Argo CD to use. So I don't have the demo set up, but if you were in the Argo CD UI and you created this application set CR, you would now see 3 different Argo CD applications in the application view, each looking like this for the most part, but with the parameterized fields substituted. So essentially, this allows you to say, target a bunch of different clusters, target a single application or multiple, but this specific application is a single application against a bunch of different clusters by only defining a single Kubernetes resource, this application set resource. So adding more clusters or removing existing clusters is just a matter of adding or removing items from this item list here. Any questions so far?
I have a short question. So when we remove an item from the list, then the corresponding application will also be deleted from Argo CD, right?
That's
including
correct.
all the resources.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so behind the scenes, it works the same way. This controller, its sole purpose is to create and delete the Argo CD application CR. So from there, the creation or deletion of the application CR is going to be handled by the Argo CD application controller. So application set doesn't do anything beyond beyond create, edit, or delete the Argo CD application resource. From there, it's up to Argo CD to handle the deletion recursively or otherwise.
And Argo CD might delete resources managed by the application if it has a finalizer.
Yeah.
And does application set insert or somehow manipulate with that finalizer?
Yes. Yeah, it adds a finalizer. That's the current behavior.
Good. Thank you.
Yep. So that's the list generator. That's the probably the easiest to follow. There's a couple other. There's a cluster generator, which rather than using a list of items that's defined in the application CR, it has the ability to actually look at the clusters that are defined as secrets in the Argo CD namespace and target those with an additional filter that's not shown here, but with an additional filter value in the clusters field that allows you to further target what's going to be have resources applied to it. And then finally, there's the Git generator, which is definitely the most complex and also the most interesting of the 3 generators. In this case, this would be put in place to handle something like the monorepo use case, where you want to deploy a bunch of different applications to a single Kubernetes cluster. What this is saying is, okay, look in this repository, go through all of the directories under add-ons within this repository that meet this glob. And for each one that's found, use that as a value into the template for the applications that are going to be created by the application set controller. So if we had 5 different applications that were defined under add-ons, each of those 5 applications would be turned into template values and would be substituted into here. In this case, it is by path. So this allows you to, once again, with a single CR, target a Kubernetes cluster but define a bunch of different applications against it. So if you wanted to add a new application or you wanted to remove an existing application, it would just be a matter of, well, you wouldn't even have to edit the CR in this case. It would just be a matter of making a change to this source repository. An application set would detect that and then make the required changes to the generated Argo CD applications. Yep. So that's application sets as it exists in a nutshell. Like I said, everything is defined in the proposal document that's linked on the repo. It's nice and long with lots of detail. So definitely check that out if you're interested in what some of the requirements were for application set when it was first created, and where folks have said they want to see it go in the future. Any questions before I jump into talking about how we can integrate it with Argo CD?
Hey, Jonathan,
No.
I just had one small question. When you say you refer to the path.base name, are you just referring to a bunch of customization.yaml files and then it looks into the base and then pulls out the name from there? Or
it would depend. Yeah, it would depend on which resource definition tool or resource tool the user was using. So it could be Helm, it could be Customize, it could be JSONet, it could just be a directory of Kubernetes manifests. We definitely need more tests to verify that each of those work as expected with application sets. But behind the scenes, it is using the Argo CD repo server to pull the applications from a repository. So the logic should be the same between what application sets is seeing and what Argo CD repo server is seeing.
Okay.
So I don't have a question, but I wanted to say just a quick thank you for this presentation on application set, because I was just, you know, I was not really following what the project is doing, and I always had a hard time understanding what it is doing. And so this was very useful introduction. It was very valuable. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, I thought you did a really good job with the presentation. Thanks.
Awesome. Were there any other questions before I jump into what's on the screen?
Yes, I had one short question. Have you thought already about how do you join results of two generators? If you have two generators defined in the same application set instance.
Yeah, so the design proposal does not attempt to join generators. You can specify multiple generator types, and it should handle them properly, although I don't know if there are any tests that actually verify that. But when you do specify multiple generators together in the same CR, the values are kept entirely separate. It's just additional values that are added to the array. There's no attempt to merge or join those values. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be done. It's just it hasn't been thought through on the proposal yet.
Okay, and the reason I ask about it is because the example which you shown, it kind of lead me to idea that maybe we want to kind of multiply outputs of two generators, because in the first example we had generator that create clusters and second create add-ons, and basically I think the real use case in this case is you want to install all add-ons from the repo into all the clusters, so you want kind of multiplication of. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the when they put the proposal together, the focus was on defining an initial set of requirements, getting those set in stone and implemented. And there's definitely lots of room for future work such as that. And I believe even that specific requirement is documented as future work within the proposal. So it's definitely something that the proposal implementers and writers discussed. And yeah, I agree. It definitely sounds useful. Cool. So I've talked about what the application set CR is, what it does. It's a controller for Kubernetes. So it sounds like we are interested in integrating the application set controller proper into the Argo CD project. So,
Jonathan,
yes.
if we could take a pause and Alex, Jesse, or somebody, one of the maintainers, if you could go over what your expectations with respect to this would be, just to set a level playing field for the whole conversation, and then we can get back to this.
Are you asking expectations of how it should be integrated, or expectations for the conversation we're about to have? Or
I think I think the how needs to be figured out, but I would say as a destination of the whole thing, like when we started Argo CD, we didn't have application sets. Now that we have it, where do you see it going from your perspective? And then we can get into details here. That's what I'm kind of looking for.
where we see application sets going for Argo CD, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean the why. I mean the how can be figured out, but then if you could just put in the why in there, then we could go into the how.
Yeah. So AppSets actually was born out of a actually real need that we currently have and still do for managing add-ons in our environment. So as you know, we have I think we're approaching like 300 clusters that we need to manage, and right now we have several different ways people are doing add-ons in there. One is an add-on that is just part of our distribution, so to speak. So when we do a new release of our Kubernetes clusters, there is a pre-canned add-on that is just, that version is tied to that Kubernetes release that we deploy. That's very inflexible.
Quick question. So could you in 30 seconds maybe give an example of what an add-on is in the Argo CD perspective?
Oh, add-on is like
everyone understands it perfectly.
Yeah. Add-on is like Prometheus operator, or ALB ingress controller, or Argo rollouts, or Argo workflows, like basically something typically they're controllers.
Okay, you mean, okay, got it. So I think by add-on you meant all those additional things that one could use with Argo CD. I was kind of thinking as like a Helm or JSONet kind of add-on, but no, you're not talking about that. Those are plugins we call them.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. So they're kind of like part of our part of our distribution of what internet cluster is. So that's one way we deploy. So the problem with that approach is that it's very tightly coupled to the release of the Kubernetes distribution that we do. So let's say we roll out a new ALB ingress controller. In order to, and that version is not great, then in order to roll back, we have to do another IKS release, or sorry, another Kubernetes distribution release, and then that, so you're kind of locked to the release cycle of the Kubernetes distribution that we provide. But as a add-on maintainer, like for example, I work on rollouts currently, I would like to release like at my own cadence and disconnected from the release of the Kubernetes distribution. So I need to, deploy to hundreds of clusters at my own cadence, and have the ability to roll back if necessary. So the use case is, at least for the multi-cluster one, is to, and currently I script a lot of that. So through GitHub. So in a single Git repo, I have many different folders for the different clusters, and so AppSet was born out of the need to try to automate that somehow and formalize it into like a spec.
Got it.
And the different people have different ways of automating it, and this is trying to solve that.
Yeah. Got it.
Sorry for background noise. I wanted to just quickly mention one more kind of use case for AppSet, And this is more interesting for application developers and Argo CD administrators. So if you have Argo CD that manages hundreds of apps and used by like a dozen of teams, then configuration of Argo CD itself became kind of an asset, and you want to store it somewhere, and maybe make it a little bit more self-service and let people create application without asking administrator to make changes in Argo CD. So, and right now there are just two ways to do it pretty much. One is you build some kind of automation on top of Argo CD that uses Argo CD API to manage it. This is what we did at Intuit. So we have some so-called dev portal, and dev portal kind of is a source of truth of applications. So it has its own database, and basically it creates applications using its own logic. That's one way. And another way is fully declarative management of Argo CD. So you can have a repository which has a bunch of Argo CD applications and config maps and all of that. And it's like, these are two extremes. Basically, you either do everything by hand or you build a whole application to manage Argo CD. And I think application set is kind of middle ground. So administrator can define pretty much a rule how applications are created using AppSet CRD, and then the users use it, and you don't have to build the whole thing to automate it.
Yeah,
so hopefully that makes sense.
Actually, it's a very smart use case. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but now as you told about it, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea was that generators can implement like real use cases how you can manage applications. So you might, sorry, not use case, the real convention that can work in your organization. So the simplest example, you can say, my developers they have access to the repo, they can create folders without asking me, and application set is configured to trust that repository, basically, and you can trust some particular repository because your application set is configured to create application and deploy these applications only to a certain cluster. So if you have team and the team is responsible for a cluster, and you have application set that pull applications from predefined repo and deploy into the cluster, then you kind of done. You don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to, as an Argo CD administrator, you don't have to review each and every application which is created by the team. To be honest, even what we have now, like a lot of effort was put into it to implement it, and it was not easy at all. So, and it's still like not perfect. Sometimes we, as Argo CD administrator, have to go and fix something, in Argo CD configuration, which maybe didn't work, didn't went smoothly.
Thank you, Alex, Jesse. Jonathan, you can go over with your proposal.
Cool. So the question then becomes, we agree that there is a need for application set. How application set should work has been well defined in the proposal. Folks have gone and implemented, begun to implement and implemented that proposal. The generators that I talked about, the list, the cluster, and Git, which should cover a number of the use cases that are included in the proposal. So we may feel at this point that it's at a good place where it can be integrated with the Argo CD project itself. So rather than the source code living in the application set repo as like an incubator project, it would instead be included with the Argo CD project proper, and source code would live in there, and application set controller would be deployed as part of a standard Argo CD install. That's about, I'm going to go into the details of how we get there, but that's about what this proposal is proposing. It's saying, okay, application sets, we know there's a need. We know that it's at a good level of maturity, but there's still more work to be done. So let's discuss what it would take to move it into the Argo CD project itself, the source code and the functionality, the Kubernetes resources and so on. Any questions on that before I go into details?
My only question there would be that we should also discuss multiple paths at the top of the tree, which is we either physically move things or import that as a controller, or we don't make any movements at all. We just in our release payload also include the app sets. So yeah, I think if you could just go over which ones you're going to consider now, which ones could be a later discussion, that would be awesome as well.
Yep, sounds good. So in terms of how to, were there any other questions or thoughts before I jumped into the nitty-gritty details? Cool. So it then becomes a question of, from a technical perspective, how do we move the code that's in the application set repo and the controller itself into Argo CD? So I've kind of laid out a set of steps here. They're very detailed. I would say don't let the level of detail make you think that anything is set in stone. I find it personally beneficial to kind of go into this kind of detail for each step in a process to make sure that I've fully considered the software engineering details. But that doesn't mean that like this is the way it will be done. Think of what I'm proposing here and this document in general as more of a set of proposed questions or discussion points or ways to query requirements or options that are in our collective heads. So I'll start out with probably what would be required first. There are a number of quality of life improvements to the repository that are required. Go formatting the code, for example, that's been done, PR 62. We obviously would need to fix any lint errors using the same rule set as Argo CDs, add a GitHub action to enforce that. That's pull request 63, waiting for review. Add a go test action. We want to catch any regressions. And probably most importantly, if we're going to be integrating it with the Argo CD code base, we need to reorganize the code packages in such a way that when the source code does move, that it fits nicely within the existing source code format that's already in Argo CD. So probably very similar to the way that components are already defined in Argo CD. So the application controller is separate from the API server is separate from the application controller, is separate from the repo server, something along those lines. Next question then becomes, okay, so we've got the code quality where we want it. Which of the remaining functionality that's defined in the application set proposal are we going to say should be in place before we move it into Argo CD proper? So what's currently implemented in Argo CD is the 3 generators that I showed you. That was cluster, which looks at the Argo CD secrets that are defined in order to find which clusters are to be targeted. There's the list generator, where you specify a set of YAML values for the specific Argo CD clusters to target, or Git directory, where what application set controller will do is look through a Git repository at the file structure and use the values from that to decide what to deploy. So that's all in. It has unit tests for it. There's still some additional functionality in the proposal that is in progress. That's pull request 45. Which implements the Git files discovery, which is probably the most powerful of the generators to be implemented. That's still in progress. So as kind of an open question, we have the option of waiting for that to be finished before we integrate it with Argo CD. Or in general, if there is functionality that we would like to see, or like a minimum level of functionality that or a minimum maturity level for that functionality that we would like to see, that's definitely something that we should talk about at this stage. My personal take, yep, go for it.
A question, how much, dependency is the repo server currently with app sets? Like, for example, the Git generator, I would imagine needs a lot of functionality from the repo server to accomplish its generator.
So at present, it calls it through RPC, just like the other components. And the only API method that it's calling is get paths. That is used by Git directory. Now, when Git files discovery is implemented, that's the one with the outstanding pull request there. I actually have it here. At present, what they're doing is just calling Argo CD's, I think /util/git functionality directly, which behind the scenes is a combination of, I think, go git and actually calling the git CLI directly. And so they're doing something similar. So right now, pull request 45 does that, but what we would need to do is implement a new API for repo server that handles that rather than just calling the git CLI.
Got it, thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of what proposal items we want to handle at this stage, my take is that it sounds like folks are already using application set controller in their environments, which is a testament to the level of functionality that's currently there. So I don't think there's any specific functionality that would block integration. If anybody has any differing viewpoints, it would be good to share them. The other thing that I would note in terms of functionality that remains, one open question for us is essentially once application set controller is running as part of a standard Argo CD install, where in that standard Argo CD install will it be running? Would we integrate the application set controller alongside the Argo CD application controller? So it would live in that same container and stateful set, or would it just be an independent container and deployment like some of the other components that are as part of Argo CD? So this one, I imagine there are probably more opinions on. My personal take is at this point, it's probably easiest to keep it separate. So just creating a new deployment resource whose sole purpose is to run the application set controller. And then once we've finished the integration, to consider integrating that with application.
Yeah, I'd agree on that, actually. I think it should be a separate workload, a separate pod.
Yeah, so essentially that's what I'm proposing here. Keep it separate for now. I can make the argument either way that we could implement it with the application controller. There are advantages to doing that. There are trade-offs to doing it. Likewise for keeping it separate. So at this point, I'm saying, since there are already a number of moving parts here, it's best to keep that particular moving part frozen and then to consider it at a later stage once everything else is in place.
Yeah, that makes the most sense to me.
Cool. By the way, I've shared this Google Doc in the agenda, and it is like a standard Google Doc. So feel free to add review comments on the side. I have them turned off at the moment just so I can give you a clear picture. But here or in Slack or on any of the issues in the application set repo, we can definitely have further conversations on this. We've looked at quality of life improvements to the source. We've looked at what functionality remains to be implemented. So next up is testing. About what you'd expect. There are already unit tests in the application set repo. So just look at those and see if there are any big gaps that we want to fill. One thing that the application set repo didn't have was a kind of ETE test framework, similar to the way that Argo CD handles ETE. So I implemented that. That's PR66. And if you're familiar with Argo CD's ETE, it looks exactly the same. It's essentially the same API. Contexts transition with when to actions, which transition with then to consequences, and then you have your expects and so on. So if you've written Argo CD ETE tests, you'll find the exact same API here. So that's pull request 66. Feel free to jump on that if you want to see how that's done or want to provide feedback on implementation details. Once that's merged, it would be great to have a GitHub action that runs those. I've already got one as part of the pull request, also based on the exact same way that Argo CD is doing it, embedding K3S as a, installing K3S as part of a GitHub action, starting up Argo CD E2E, and then starting up application set E2E, and then running through a set of application tests. So that's the two types of automated testing. And then finally, for this stage, just some manual testing to catch any bugs before we move into integration. Any questions on testing steps?
Maybe a proposal, like one more integration, pre-integration step could be kind of to try to, ask more Argo CD users to try application set so we can catch, something we're missing. Maybe we should publish a blog and encourage more people to try it.
Yes,
and
definitely.
Feedback. Okay.
And I have got a question about the unit tests. So what's the current test coverage in the?
Not sure. It's not. They don't have coverage enabled as part of the repo at present. So I'd have to set that up and then give you a number. I don't have that offhand, but I will add that to the list as well.
Thanks.
And yeah, that would definitely inform to what degree the unit tests are testing the functionality that's in there. Okay, so that's testing. Next up is the final stage before it actually gets implemented with Argo CD proper. Simple step, make sure that appsets go mod is equivalent to Argo CDs. If we're going to merge the code, we want to make sure our dependencies are in sync. And then in a fork or branch of Argo CD, so at this point, dealing with the Argo CD code, move the app set code into it, add the CRDs, but keep them separate in staging, update the Docker file, add feature flags to app set code. I'll talk about that in a second. Ensure it builds and basically do everything that we can inside the standalone PR, inside the standalone branch, to get the Argo CD plus application set code in such a state that we feel that it's ready to merge into the Argo CD repository. Once we have that PR ready, once we feel it meets our needs, once the tests are passing as expected, then we move into the actual integration. So I'll handle questions at the end of this because these sections kind of go together. So I'm looking to avoid a big bang integration for obvious reasons. I'm proposing that appset code be added to the Argo CD code base, but behind a feature flag. So the appset code would live in the Argo CD code base, but would not be enabled by default and would not be executed as part of a standard Argo CD install until we feel it is ready to do so. What do I mean by?
If I may quickly add to that, if there's even a smaller bank to it, that's a proposal again, that is, we don't move anything, but we just ship it with the rest of the Argo CD release. But again, that's up to the whole group here, just throwing it out there.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about that option real quick. Rather than at this point having the code move into Argo CD, we could have the code continue to live separately from Argo CD, and at this point just ship the application set image as part of a deployment that is part of the standard Argo CD install. To me, that kind of feels like a middle step, which we could totally do. Here I'm outlining the big step, which is it would be great to be able to maintain both sets of code bases in a single location in the Argo CD repo and handle it from there. But as you said, and as you commented on the Google Doc, there are definitely middle grounds to this that are less integrated than what I'm talking about here, but also easier and less risk.
Yeah, thank you.
So just to understand that proposal, that one is to have the basically bringing in appset code into Argo CD, build the image, but not but turn it off, and so if people need it, they get an image for with every release that they can turn on in their own environment. Is that the idea?
The one by me. Just
yeah,
now?
the one by that you.
Right. The one by me is effectively we don't move any code around, but we do. What we effectively do is in our install YAML, we have another deployment which points to a built image
so we
of application sets.
Yeah.
And all the permissions, etc. So we don't move anything around. It's just that I think the key to that part would be where we need to ensure that we make a release of application sets and test it out. But then, like I said, it's not a pure integration. It's just shipping a bunch of things together. I think Jonathan is making a point more about integrating and then shipping things together.
Exactly. And yep, go ahead.
Okay. I had similar proposal to kind of. I feel like if it will be much easier for contributors to contribute into appset, without moving code, and I would use it as advantage to just to improve performance, to make things easier. Basically, CI is quicker. We don't have to retest the whole Argo CD and wait for like 20 minutes. It won't hit retests. And at the same time, I think the user would not like to manage two image versions. So I was thinking maybe Argo CD for CI process could import appset maybe as a library and build embedded into Argo CD image. So we still have one image, and that image has kind of built-in binary for repo server, for controller, for appset, and then the user can opt in and start a pod that uses Argo CD image and starts appset. But code still can be inside of appset repository.
I want to point out that these approaches will only work until we need, for example, UI integration. At which point, basically, it has to be in the same code base, I think, right?
Yes, you're right. But I'm not, I think it's totally up to contributors, but I'm trying to point that it will be easier to make code changes in appset repository, just because it's lighter, it has less number of code files, and
right.
the filter is quicker. And,
yeah, I mean, so just I think from even a UI perspective, we could potentially design the UI in a way whether the UI responds to certain, whether the UI could show certain screens based on the availability of application sets, because after all, it's a CR based thing. So if it's not there, it pretends that it's not aware of it, or even the CRD, for example. So yeah, I think that's one. I think, but that's a good point. That if we need a good UI integrated experience, we need to ship it together. I think the other factor I'd like to put in is that we may consider moving the code in here, or we may not, but I think some of the due diligence that we have to do before we ship the image as part of the release remains the same. So which means if there is increased serious testing that needs to be put in, that remains the same. So the only way we could take a look at it is if you're not moving the code in, is that, I mean, moving the code in could be more of a monorepo approach. Not having the code in, it's not a monorepo approach. But the seriousness of the testing and maturity remains the same. That doesn't change.
And I think, and I mean, either way we should move appset into Argo approach,
right?
Org, yes.
Yeah, correct.
Just to highlight that it's no longer experiment.
Yes, and so I think on that we need to have a separate discussion on whether that should go through the process, or if you all agree that we could move it in just as a separate thing.
To me personally, it looks like it's our internal decision to create a new repository. It doesn't seem to have to go through like a formal process. Yeah.
I'm happy with
it's
that.
It's like an implementation detail to me, but maybe some of us have different opinions.
Yeah. Yep, agreed. Yeah, so Alex brought up the idea of integrating as a package or as a dependency of Argo CD. That would definitely make it easier to integrate in some ways. But as was mentioned, once we build deeper integration between Argo CD and that project proper in things like UI or CLI, at that point, we may want to consider having the code be fully integrated. This is kind of like the general discussion of where to draw your microservice boundaries.
Mhm.
And of course, there are many components in Argo CD that are separate, but it all exists in the same code base: application controller, API server, repo server, and so on. So it'd be a question of, is it more effort to keep it separate, or is it more effort to move it inside?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like as soon as we start seeing bugs where upset works with one Argo CD version, it doesn't work with another one,
yeah,
like it's time to merge them.
Exactly. So yeah, I go into lots of detail here about how to essentially make that move as risk-free as possible. But it all boils down to use feature flags on the app set code, use GitHub Actions to make sure that we don't regress Argo CD itself, of course, but also ensure that app sets works in its new home. Once that's done, enable the GitHub Actions, allow them to fail the build, fix failures, enable the feature flag in the project on by default. So that would be equivalent to shipping it. And then finally, as the last step, removing the feature flag supporting code. So in that way, we phase the transition in, the code moves in, but it doesn't run yet. Then the code runs, but only as part of automated tests. And then the code is running as part of the product proper, but we can easily turn it off with a feature flag. And then finally, once we're happy with that, get rid of the ability to support the feature flag at all. And yeah, that's basically the idea behind the stage merger, the idea of actually moving the code in and handling it inside Argo CD. After that, there are a few more items which are, I think, fairly self-explanatory. Add project documentation, so add generator examples to the Argo CD user guide, and then start looking at all the great new features that are defined in the proposal and that other folks have proposed. Things like CLI integration, things like UI integration, things like templates within generators and generator filters, which are in the proposal. And of course, always important, making sure it scales, making sure it performs, and making sure it's secure. And that's all I've got.
Awesome. Excellent.
Thank you.
Awesome plan.
Yeah, this is really well done. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to quickly touch upon one more thing, Jesse and Alex. I know we do want to have Argo CD to a CNCF graduation sometime early next year. I think I'd like to figure out what the impact of pulling this in would be, especially from a security perspective, because I think Argo CD has gone through security review and all that, but this hasn't yet. So we should align our timelines accordingly. I think that's all I'm saying, so that that doesn't get impacted.
Yeah.
We already, like, maybe you're referring to, so there is a action item. We need to close all the sneak security alerts, and we plan to kind of do it by end of, somewhere in January.
Right, but then
this is like,
are there plans to do it for application sets as well? Because it might open up a new can of worms in that conversation, which is fine because this is getting added now. So we might want to align the timings accordingly. I mean, we could potentially be a bit aggressive and pull in application sets in that and in that same review as well, if you want, or we could do it later. But
I'm thinking I think we should be able to turn on SNCC for app sets. Is that Alex, do you know if that's possible, or Jan?
Yeah, sure is, yeah. But I think we need to, I think Ed or someone of the organization of the GitHub organization administrators need to install the SNCC application for Argo Approach Labs. So then it will be possible.
Okay. So why don't we start doing that and then turning that on for app sets so that you know, those issues will get resolved ahead of time before a potential merger of the code base.
Got it. So when we, right, so then can we have a timeline for ourselves where we would have the merger done in time so that when we do a CNCF graduation, this goes along with it instead of, or is that necessary? I would say. I mean, would it be flagged as a separate project moving into a monorepo format if you do it later on? I think that's something which I'd like to know. If yes, then it's better to do it now and then go for the graduation altogether.
I think I mean, I'm just guessing, but you know, if it's something that we're distributing as part of the Argo CD, regardless if it's part of the code base or not, I think it would need the SNCC to be passing.
Correct.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So if we do the upfront work of just making sure it passes, even as an independent project, then if it does get merged in time or if it doesn't, I think we're covered.
Personally, I think that the SNCC it's very centric on the Docker images, right? So I'm not sure. Basically, when is there an app project app set Docker image?
There is, yeah.
So if we would move it into Argo CD code base, then it would be part of the same Docker image that Argo CD is part of, right?
That's right.
And I think so. Most of the issues we see in SNCC, they are actually coming from Node, so from the npm ecosystem, and some or the others are coming from upstream Debian base image, and I think it does not scan the Go code, right? Oh. So it also won't scan any code from the app set. But what we could do is we also have a Sonar Cube, so that also does some static code analysis, and maybe we can integrate. So Argo CD is integrated into Sonar Cube, and maybe we can integrate the app set there as well, so we can get a feeling on if there's something really wrong or if no big bad things are waiting for us there.
Yeah. So I would suggest from here we should just enable those two things and understand.
Okay.
I can't imagine there being as much thing because there's no UI, there's no web service.
Right.
So I think it might not be bad at all.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask Ed if he can enable the Argo Approach Labs organization for those both tools.
Yeah.
Should we consider just moving upsets into Argo Approach organization?
Just move them. Yeah, actually, that'll be, I think. Yeah, since we already enabled it in Argo Approach, we could just.
I guess the initial idea of even having Argo Approach Labs was to just avoid having junk in Argo, but right now I think we're all sure we're going to keep working on upset. Like there is no doubt about it, and I think we consider it as just a library of Argo CD.
Yeah.
And it's not a separate, it's part of Argo CD. So I don't see any reason why we
right. So the guidance is that we're not introducing a completely new independent project like Argo Advanced, Argo Rollouts, workflows. This is part of the ecosystem. This is not considered wouldn't be considered like another major project. So moving it into Argo Proj is I think within the I think the guidelines that we set ourselves about introducing new projects. If this is an ecosystem project.
Yeah, then it becomes even more easy to integrate with SNCC and SonarQube as well.
Let's approach Ed about saying we think it's time to move it out of labs. He actually suggested this a little while back himself, so I think he'd be totally fine with it.
Yeah, the one would be good, I would say. I mean, if you're speaking about the one, I had a conversation with him this week that are there any screaming issues you see that would stop us from doing that? He said no, so he's good.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Oh, there is. I know we're out of time. I want
go ahead.
to quickly get confirmation that there's a feature that we got offered in GitHub called GitHub Discussions. Have you guys seen this? This is not Argo projects.
Prompted. Yeah, I've been prompted multiple times, but I've never used it.
Okay. This is actually something kind of like Stack Overflow, but it's native to Git. And then I'm actually kind of excited about this integrating or turning this on for Argo project because first of all, like all the questions and stuff that get posted will be searchable. They'll come up in search results if you search our GitHub repo for things. So I think people will discover answers to questions because they probably won't search Stack Overflow. Yeah. And I think we can funnel a lot of the issues that are typically questions or support requests into discussions. And I think we'll also get better participation from the community because I think there's less of a context switch of people who are interacting with Argo Proj Git repo, but also then they can easily go to discussions. And I think that there's I'm assuming there's like a good linkage, but like the ability to link back and forth between issues and discussions. And for all those reasons, the other important thing is the identities of people helping out are consistent from Git to discussions. Like it's the same, people. For all those reasons, I'd like to propose turning this on to to kind of facilitate discussions. Any objections or thoughts?
I think this is good because going to a Slack channel, asking somebody something, having an answer, and then not having it searchable at all is pretty waste at times. It's good to have a one-on-one conversation on a Slack channel. That's awesome. I think I'm good with this. I think the bigger challenge will have to be, I mean, it's not a challenge, but in general, we'd like to figure out how do we bring more conversations on this from Slack, given that we already have a huge number of people there. But like I said, if we can at least if this group can make this GitHub discussions chatty enough, people will be encouraged to come here. I think
that's which is why I'm bringing it up here because we have a lot of the people I expect to be helping answer questions and stuff like so. If like turning this on, I think I encourage people to answer questions here so that we have like more permanent answers, not like ephemeral answers that disappear after like a few months in Slack. So
I would propose we already pretty much every day we go through GitHub issues, which are questions, and answer them. So we can change GitHub issue template and explicitly ask to create conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So the issue template should say, "Oh, is this a question?" And you can actually link from an issue template to another link, and then we would say, "Oh, if it's a question, click this," and that will take you to the link to actually create the discussion rather than.
And we keep doing the same process, but instead of looking at issues, we can just look into discussions.
Okay, cool. So if that was my question to the group, is that if I can turn this on, and then if like encourage you guys to start answering questions and encourage others to use it for their questions.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I think this was a good meeting. We'll keep following up on app sets in the upcoming meetings.
No.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jonathan, for the awesome presentation. It was very, very good.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.